Hello and good morning to all of you. Today in our UPSC GS series under sustainable development issues and challenges, we are doing unit 4 issues and challenges. The structure of this topic is number 1 introduction, number 2 sustainable economic growth, number 3 achieving sustainable livelihood, number 4 living in harmony with nature, and at the last, fifth is summary of this unit issues and challenges. Number 1 introduction. The challenge of sustainable development is the challenge of achieving environmental conservation and resource management without compromising the targets of growth and development. It is therefore a process of making human and environmental regeneration not only an end of economic growth but also a means. It redefines wealth and restructures qualitative development in economic growth policies. Sustainable development is in itself revolutionary since it replaces exchange value by intrinsic value, market regulation by self regulation, and capital accumulation with with de-accumulation. It is an effort and a design to raise poor countries of the world from social decadence, exploitation, global inequity, and waste. Many questions intrigue, many questions intrigue the concept of sustainable development. Is economic growth possible without destroying our environment? What supports sustainable economic growth? What are the major contentious issues involved in sustainable economic growth? Does sustainable economic growth affect stock market gains? Can developed countries continue with their consumption patterns without damaging the planet's ability to sustain life? These are perplexing questions that have become crucial to the international debates and political battles. The major problem the world faces is still intractable problem of poverty and hunger. Achieving food security requires more than just production of food. Overall perspectives of economic development are being increasingly seen as a better promoter of food security than food production alone. But this cannot be achieved without firm knowledge. Action upon land and water is an unavoidable part of any economic policy. The economic development and food security require knowledge-based firm action upon land and water and indeed on all natural resources. Accordingly, natural resource management (NRM) is one of the biggest issues in sustainable development. For example, land degradation, desertification, loss of wetlands, and deforestation are very real constraints to the future sustainability of good agriculture everywhere in the world. However, as we enter the 21st century, we have begun to face a new sustainability challenge in business and trade. The growth of transnational corporations (TNCs) have taken control of resource policies in the world. These TNCs have changed the contours of the welfare of state and Keynesian economics. Since TNCs bring foreign direct investment (FDI), the poor countries are making extensive regulatory changes in their economic resources policies to make themselves appear attractive investment areas for FDI. Policies that might ensure sustainable use of resources are being changed for better business and FDI. This large company and TNC based development has been so rapid that by mid 1990s we were faced with an alarming and the stupefying statistics. In 1995, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, even CTAD, study found that 40,000 corporations in all controlled two-thirds of the total world trade in goods and services, according to a report. Number one, on the world's largest economies, 51 are corporations, only 49 are countries. The budget of Mitsubishi Corporation is larger than that of Indonesia, the world's fourth most populous country and a land of enormous natural wealth. Number two, the combined sales of the world's top 200 corporations are equal to 28% of the world's gross domestic product GDP. Number three, these same 200 corporations employ only 18.8 million people, less than one third of 1% of the world's people, and the downsizing continues. Number 4. In 1995, the total value of mergers and acquisitions for the world exceeded the preceding year by 25%. In parallel to the Better Business and FDI narrow view, since the Earth Summit, sustainable development has been faced with the following contentious issues which are being debated and are still to be resolved. Number one, while the rich nations consume the largest share of resources, the poor countries bear the cost of this consumption in the form of pollution, chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, deforestation, global warming, and loss of fisheries, wilderness, and animal resources. Number two, it has been debated between the rich and the poor nations that forests of the third world countries are sinks of the pollution mostly generated by the developed countries. Thus, while the developed countries are trying to restrict the exploitation of forests by the poor countries, they are not at the same time willing to restrict their own production and consumption systems to meet the demands of sustainable economic growth. Number three, the threats of biotechnology and genetically modified GM foods to the indigenous agriculture and rural economy of developing countries, besides also disturbing their village institutions and local economy. Number fourth, different perspectives on climate change conventions or the Kyoto Protocol, under which the United States, Canada, and other developed countries would have to reduce greenhouse gases by 5% from the 1990 levels. This is presently the hottest debate in international politics, since developed and the developing countries have all been taking different positions on Kyoto obligations. The following five themes became the center of concern at the 10th session of the United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development CSD 10 in May 2002 and the World Summit on Sustainable Development WSSD in August 2002. Number 1, stewardship and conservation. Number 2, innovation and partnership. Number 3, sustainable communities. Number 4, health and the environment. Number 5, international governance. These terms set up certain priorities for the developed and the developing countries, and all future collaboration between the countries would largely depend upon their willingness to explicitly incorporate these priorities in their national policy agenda and actions taken towards them. The following main themes focus upon the agenda of governance for sustainable development. Number one, experiences of countries implementing sustainable development. Number two, institutional arrangements for implementing sustainable development. Number three, the role of governance and public administration in the achievement and implementation of sustainable development, the role of regional organizations in promoting good governance for the implementation of WSSD outcomes, referring to trade and sustainable development in Chapter 2 of Agenda 21 and in Chapters 5 and 10 of the plan of implementation. It is mentioned that trade liberalization and globalization can have both positive and negative effects on sustainable development. There is a continued need to support efforts by the developing countries to integrate themselves into and derive benefits from the multilateral trading system. At the same time, attention is given to enhancing the contribution of the multilateral trading system to sustainable development. Agenda 21 of the Earth Summit calls for a supportive international climate for achieving environment and development goals by number A, promoting sustainable development through trade liberalization. Number B, making trade and environment mutually supportive. Number C, providing adequate financial resources to developing countries dealing with international debt. And number D, encouraging microeconomic policies conducive to environment and development. A closer integration of trade and sustainable development can play a major role in achieving sustainable development and poverty eradication. Number two, sustainable economic growth. There are serious challenges to economic growth in present times which may be described under following points. Number 1. From quantity to quality. The quantitative aspect of growth had settled upon the simplistic tendency of cost benefit analysis about the worth of a productive process. However, the intangibles in nature are difficult to quantify. Thus, new forms of accounting techniques are being developed to quantify the value of flora and fauna in nature so that the material and monetary scarcity can be assessed in real terms. Incentives other than money have been found to be more welcome by communities in a large number of cases. Number two, human self development is the core of sustainable economic growth. It draws connection between individual and social change. It also encourages symbiosis between humanity and nature. The dominant industrial system survives upon various forms of mental slavery which leads to material dependence. Under this system, unhealthy relationships are tolerated and creativity and simplicity are suppressed. Number 3. From patriarchal society and male supremacy towards a holistic paradigm of equity, unsustainable economic growth is based upon male domination, beliefs in racism, subordination of nature, suppression of women and other weaker sections of society, excessive and single-minded emphasis on efficiency in the productive processes ignores these factors and encourages accumulation of surplus to very few. A feminist theory of science, on the other hand, deconstructs, lays open, and criticizes embedded assumptions that result in domination of nature and aims at developing alternatives towards a more benign relationship within the society and between society and nature. Number 4. From TINA approach to a strategy of design. TINA stands for There is No Alternative approach. It was the suggestive approach to generate cons- conspicuous conspicuous technology in colonial industrial societies, though forces of domination still exist and are growing simultaneously. The pool of knowledge in the form of awareness of alternative approaches is also growing, and this has a high liberating potential. Sustainable economic growth has reprioritized economic goals to move societies out of the commercialization trap and provide need satisfaction in a more elegant, comprehensive, and efficient manner. Number 5. Polluter pays principle. Sustainable economic growth strategies recognize that producers have a genuine responsibility towards people and labor they employ. Producers who damage conditions of good living and environment must also pay and bear the cost of damage to the society. This is possible in two ways. One, by internalizing the cost of damage in the productive process and the cost of object produced, and two, by a regulatory mechanism such as public liability or insurance acts which may prevent obsolete and polluting technology or hazardous systems from being used in a poor region. Number 6. Appropriate technology and community owned firms. Appropriate technology refers to technologies that do not necessarily require large capital and resource intensive industrial systems. It is also need based. Community owned firms on municipality on firms or municipally owned enterprises that work not only for profit but also to protect and represent community interests such as local developmental issues that are often termed as non-profit organizations. They are also referred to as community corporations and provide alternatives to large capital and resource intensive industrial systems. In terms of appropriate technologies or methods of production that make use of local skills and resources, the developing countries provide a wealth of innovative ideas practiced at grassroots levels. These innovative ideas and practices also provide leads to alternative production systems. Number 3. Achieving sustainable livelihood. About 900 million people live in absolute poverty. Their livelihoods essentially depend upon production of natural resources and natural products. People from the least developed countries are the most vulnerable to trade-offs in their natural produce. Their livelihood depends upon the export earnings from their primary products such as agricultural and forest products, mineral, fish, etc., consumed by others. For increasing consumerism demands rapid exploitation and overexploitation causes depletion of resources, yet any commodity crash in the international market worsens the terms of trade for them. At present, 80% are poor in Latin America, 50% poor in Asia, and 50% poor in Africa live on marginal lands which are already highly susceptible to environmental degradation, desertification, and various forms of land degradation affected the livelihoods of more than 135 million people in 1984, which had increased from the 77 million in 1977. This increasing pressure on land and other natural resources prevents sustainable livelihoods of people in both the poor and the developed countries, also like United States and Japan. The achievement of sustainable livelihoods is related to the sustainable economy of nations. A highly indebted country which is suddenly made to repay debt speeds up production of primary commodities, pushing the prices further down. Between 1980 and 1991, the weighted index for a group of 33 primary products declined by half from 105 to 57, and the export commodity prices of the third world fell by 20%. Uganda alone suffered a loss of 122 million on exports from just two primary commodities, tea and coffee. In Tanzania, poor people derive half of their cash incomes from the sale of forest products such as charcoal, honey, firewood, and wild fruits. Same is true of other poor countries, including the transitional countries like India, Brazil, etc. An empirical analysis of sustainability shows that Japan and Indonesia accumulate man-made capital stocks at a high rate. An industrially developed country like Japan has small stocks of natural capital, and consequently the amount of stock it depletes is also very small, so that the country is regarded as very sustainable. On the other hand, Indonesia, with large stocks of natural capital, depletes its stocks by a large amount due to exports, so that the country is regarded as marginally non-sustainable. Sustainability within each country implies that the countries should reinvest natural resources in production to their resource consumption. Sustainable livelihood is a mode of protecting and improving the management of the natural and physical environment. The 1997 White Paper on International Development commits Department of International Development DFID to promoting sustainable livelihoods. The white paper defines sustainable livelihood as a livelihood comprises the capabilities, assets, including both material and social resources, and activities required for a means of living. A livelihood is sustainable when it can cope with and recover from stresses and shocks, and maintain or enhance its capabilities and assets both now and in the future, while not undermining the natural resource capital asset. Transnational business shifts operations from a high-cost production area to a low-cost production area and introduces production systems that have no linkages with the local communities and their resource use methods and styles of livelihoods. These communities are alienated from their own land and assets. International agreements reduce possibilities of asserting their claims and access to resources. The framework currently in use classifies five times five types of capital assets from which the individual draws his or her livelihood. Number one, natural. The natural resource stocks from which resource flows useful for livelihoods are derived. Example: land, water, wildlife, biodiversity, environmental resources. Number two, social. The social resources, networks, membership of groups, relationships of trust, access to wider institutions of society upon which people draw in pursuit of livelihood. The skills, number three, human. The skills, knowledge, ability to work, and good health important to the ability to pursue different livelihood strategies. Number fourth, physical. The basic infrastructure, transport, shelter, energy and communications, and the production equipment and means which enable people to pursue their livelihoods. Number five, financial. The financial resources which are available to people, whether savings, supplies of credit, or regular remittances or pensions, and which provide them with different livelihood options. The selection of these capital assets is a subjective exercise, but it provides a good starting point to assess as to how and in what combinations assets actually translate into sustainable livelihoods. Livelihoods are ideally sustainable when all stakeholders are empowered and have enhanced access to assets. This calls for a change in the status quo and by implication a shift in the power relations towards equality. To achieve this, therefore, attention to the constitutive side of politics, that is, governance is required. The key governance issue to change the rules and underlying power structures towards a positive sustainable livelihood outcome may be summarized as number one, people centered, number two, responsive and participatory, number three, multi level, number four, partnership, number five, sustainable, number six, dynamic. The above issues, inter alia, require attention to the following: appropriate knowledge. Knowledge, in order to appropriate, has to be rooted in the community resource use pattern and is politically neutral. It has to be ensured that channels are created within institutions to allow for his knowledge to be effectively and clearly communicated to those making decisions. Prevailing systems suggest excessive focus upon formal or codified types of knowledge, ignoring the tacit or experiential knowledge embedded in community practices appropriate to capturing local dynamics and local differentiated patterns of resource use. Therefore, assessments of needs and decisions on action are to be based on the views of all, even those that may not be less endowed with formal knowledge organized through formal education systems, usually the poor and marginalized sections of population. In this respect, participatory poverty assessments (PPAs) are a major step towards the poor defining their needs and having a say in decisions affecting them. PPAs are making national as well as local impacts. National PPAs have been produced, for example, in Uganda, Zambia, and others. This reorients the ownership and management patterns of natural resource as well as contributes to enhancing overall effectiveness, being rooted in people's everyday understandings and knowledge of ecological processes. Equitable. Equity is the basis of sustainable development policies. Questions such as who decides on resource use, policies, and approaches, and who benefits from them suggest the need for an equitable economic base. Institutions can play a key role in redistributing tangible assets, especially land, securing land rights and rights to services, removing restrictions which impoverish and weaken the poor, and in implementing measures to guard against discrimination in all its guises. The principle of equity needs to guide not only how institutions govern access to resources and assets, but also in determining what assets are needed and created, that is, in terms of technology, infrastructure, etc. Focus on Focus on equitable growth ensures long-term benefits to mankind. Participatory participation is necessary for effective policy and for guarding against arrogance and suspicion when, when institutions assume the right to make decisions on behalf of others. Groups engaged in livelihoods often do not have the resources and political influence to represent their interests in national and international fora. It is more realistic to explore ways in which such groups, for example, of farmers and others, can feed their concerns into regional and national decision making in such a way that the concerns can then go on to be represented at the international level. Flexible and adaptable institutions for sustainable livelihood are opposed to the top-down or trickle-down approaches. They are flexible enough to accommodate changing political and ecological circumstances, making sure that adoption of procedures are not bogged down by inertia, routine, or agency capture. This is a particularly important where institutions have to react and respond quickly to changing resource needs. Flexibility provides security, creativity, and a drive for innovation. Enforceable foresees that purpose solutions to particular problems have to be sensitive to the problems of enforcement and implementation. Often in very adverse conditions, policies that fail to be implemented undermine trust and respect in an institution, which is critical to its overall success. Enforcement procedures need to be clear and realistic, and reporting mechanisms need to be transparent in order to demonstrate effectively whether policy commitments have been met. Next point is point number 4, living in harmony with nature, and this will be covered in our next audio number 6. Okay, thank you.